Good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Katz, the Executive Director at Road of Shalom, and welcome to part 3 of our Cook and Connect series featuring world-renowned chef Julia Turshen and her mom, Rochelle Udell Turshen. As we start, I want to mention some thinking that got us to this evening, leading up to asking Julia and her mom to join us. As the duration of the pandemic became evident, we looked for ways to bring our community together in a meaningful way and in alignment with our values. And this evening, we're able to bring our diverse community together in a thought-provoking and fun way. Creating this connection with each other and addressing issues is what the Cook and Connect series strives to accomplish. During this program, Julia will first teach us how to make her coconut marble loaf, and then in the main interview, moderated by Ellen Poster, Julia will be joined by her mom, Rochelle, with an impressive background in publishing, advertising, and more. They will take us through their favorite Jewish recipes and their quest for equity at the table. We encourage you to submit questions and comments during the program in the chat box, and they will be incorporated into the interview. We may not get to everyone's questions, but we will try our best. We're happy to see everyone virtually and spend this time together. We're especially grateful to each of you, our generous supporters, for making a meaningful contribution to Road of Shalom and for your philanthropic participation. Without the commitment of the following people and organizations, we could not be here. Thank you to the Joseph W. Rosenbluth Fund, to our corporate sponsors, including First Trust Bank, Intech Contractors and Construction Managers, Divine Brothers Mechanical Contractors, CCS Fundraising, Goldstein's Rosenberg's Raphael Sachs Funeral Home, and to our Cook and Connect series patrons and our event patrons, and to everyone who has philanthropically participated. We want to give sincere thanks to our philanthropy committee members for their dedication. Ivy Barsky, Hank Bernstein, Bonnie Breyer, Jonathan Broder, Rachel Collins Clark, Eric Dickstein, Chip Ellis, Mike Hauptman, Jill Ivy, Jonathan Klein, Deborah Clare, Monica Kramer, Jonathan Kraus, Ellen Poster, our moderator, Mickey and Ellen Simon, and Fred Strober. We also would like to sincerely thank Rabbi Maderer, along with Rabbi Friedman and Cantor Glassman, our rabbis emeriti Fuchs and Kuhn, our president Hank Bernstein, Dina Horowitz, Alyssa Geller, Marcia Biggs, to Serena Shapiro, and to others working behind the scenes. You should have received your virtual program in email. If you want to locate it during our program, a link is in the chat for you. If you want to follow Julia's coconut marble loaf cooking demo in real time, we encourage you to find the recipe and instructions there as well. Also, there's a link to Julia's newest cookbook, Simply Julia, in the chat if you would like to purchase it after the program. Please remember to stay muted and submit any questions in the chat box. The cooking demo and conversation should last until roughly 8 o'clock. Thank you so much. And now I want to introduce Rabbi Jill Maderer for a Devar Torah, words of Torah, to begin.
Good evening. It's so good to see all of you. Welcome, and thank you for your support. And welcome to Julia and to Rochelle as well. I've been so inspired to learn about your work, and it was sweet to read that your grandparents owned a bread bakery in Brooklyn, as my grandparents owned a bakery in Queens. We learned in Torah this week that when Moses descends from revelation at Mount Sinai, Keren or rays of light radiate from his face. That image of light radiating serves as a source of inspiration in Jewish life. One stipulation Jewish law provides for the building of the sanctuary is the presence of windows to the outside. As the eternal light from our sanctuary radiates into the world, the Keren or the rays of light from the outdoors inspire us in our sacred space, whether physical or virtual. What we do in Jewish ritual cannot be separate from what is happening on the streets of our city and from the brokenness in this world. Keren or rays of light ensure that our eyes are wide open. It is our joy to welcome Julia Turshen, for what she does in her life's work cannot be separate from the brokenness in this world. I am grateful to join together for justice, for inspiration, and for fun. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Rabbi Maderer. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator and beloved congregant, Ellen Poster. Ellen practiced law in Massachusetts for 45 years. Starting in the 80s, she represented the LGBTQ community, fighting employment discrimination and helping same-sex couples negotiate the rights and obligations of their relationships when same-sex marriage and domestic partnerships were not available. Ellen sought to empower those without a voice to find justice. Since joining Road of Shalom 7 years ago, Ellen has been inspired by our congregation's dedication to social justice. Her passion is reflected in work as co-chair of PRISM, the LGBTQ Connection Group, and EID, the Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Task Force. She is deeply committed to Breaking Bread on Broad, which distributes essential supplies to our food insecure neighbors. She's thrilled to engage in a conversation with Julia Turshen and Rochelle Udell Turshen, who share this same passion for social justice.
Thank you, Jeff. I am thrilled to be here tonight. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our guests this evening, Julia Turshen and Rochelle Udell Turshen. Julia is a best-selling author of critically acclaimed cookbooks, including Now and Again, Feed the Resistance, and Small Victories, and her latest cookbook, Simply Julia, beautiful. She hosts the podcast, Keep Calm and Cook On, and she's the founder of Equity at the Table, an inclusive digital directory of women and non-binary individuals in food. Rochelle Udell Turshen has had a long career in publishing and advertising, including roles as the founding art director of Ms. Magazine, the editor-in-chief of Self, and the senior vice president and creative director of Chico's. She currently creates artwork, community programming, and is on the board of the Sing Sing Prison Museum. So take it away, Julia and Rochelle.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for that lovely introduction, and to Jeff and to Rabbi Jill. I'm very, very touched by what the rabbi shared. Can I just first check? You can hear me, right? Mom, you can let me know. Okay, good. I'm just making sure. I'm so happy to be here. I've been so looking forward to this. I've had this amazing week of, my cookbook came out on Tuesday, and while I haven't left my house, I feel very, very connected to so many people in so many different places. But to spend this evening with my mom, with all of you, feels incredibly special and reminds me of just, I don't know, in moments when things feel pretty impossible, like, living through a pandemic, that there are just ways we can maintain connection in a way that feels truly connected, even if we're not together. And My mom and I, along with other members of our family, and I'm sure this is true for so many people listening, we've been spending a lot of time on Zoom and a lot of time cooking and eating on Zoom. And I have come to really just appreciate it, and I'm very grateful for it. So Mom, thank you for being here. I want to thank everyone for being here, and all the people who support Rodolphe Shalom, and all of you in turn supporting me tonight. I'm deeply grateful, and so much of my work is about sharing the stories behind food, and I can think of no better group to share the story of this particular recipe with than all of you. So I'm going to show you the recipe, and then we'll get into like more talking. And Mom, since you're up here, if you have any questions along the way, please let me know. So Ellen showed you my book. This is me in my kitchen. This is also me in my kitchen. One thing that I think is really great about Zoom for this that I've always wished I could do, you know, when I've promoted other books is to bring everyone into my kitchen. So I'm very grateful that I can do that. So this is where it all happens. And I'm going to show you tonight the coconut marble loaf. I believe you all have the recipe, but for anyone who hasn't seen it, I'm just going to hold this up. I had a Post-it, but it fell out. So this is what we're making. And the reason I included this recipe in the book, you know, this is a book of recipes for healthy comfort food. And I spend so much time in the book talking about what do those two words mean, healthy and comfort, and what do they mean when you combine them? And to me, they cannot be separated. Healthy and comfort, I think, very much belong together. I know when I feel my healthiest, I feel most comfortable and comforted, and vice versa. And for me, again, I keep talking about connection. So much of what I define as healthy is feeling deeply connected to where our ingredients come from, connected to the people we're eating with or cooking for or baking for, and connected to whatever the story is behind it. So this loaf is very much a dedication to, I guess, my legacy, and which includes on my mom's side of the family, and this is my mom, everyone, my mom's parents. Some of you already know this, but for those of you who don't, my mom's parents, my grandparents, ran a bakery in Brooklyn. My mom and her sisters, my aunts, grew up in the bakery. My cousins grew up in the bakery, and I did not. I came along after the bakery, and I have spent most of my life trying in some way to get back to the bakery, through asking lots of questions about it, seeing photographs, feeling the sort of tether, the string to it. And this marble loaf cake, when I've asked, you know, my aunts in the past before they both passed away, sadly, when I've asked my mom, when I've asked my cousins, everyone's favorite things, when I've asked other people who know the bakery, you know, went there when they were growing up, I'm always asking what people really loved from the bakery. And the two things that come up all the time in these conversations are marble rye and marble pound cake. Mom, is this factual? Am I telling the truth?
Yes, I mean, people had different special things, but overall, yes, absolutely, marble rye and marble pound cake. And marble pound cake is very close to babka,
Yes,
which is a personal favorite of mine.
yeah. And part of the reason I love marbled anything is because I love all the flavors and I don't like choosing, and I like anytime two things are intertwined. Like when I get a soft serve ice cream, I want the twist. And it feels very similar here. I also think marbled baked goods are just incredibly beautiful, and I just think that's kind of worth celebrating. Yes, Mom?
You just hit a trigger for me. When Julia graduated college, she was, because of what she did and all of that, she was the speaker at her graduation, and she did a speech about a word that she learned in her creative writing class. I may screw up the classes and whatever, Julia, but
you're doing great, Mom.
Okay. She actually told a story about being in a class, and she was very struck by a poem, and the word in the poem was "and." So instead of thinking of the world as "or," Julia thought of the world as "and." So you could have, and this is me talking, Julia's much more articulate about this. chocolate and vanilla. You could have both. So the marbleizing of this actually triggered that story that you told at your graduation.
No, I'm glad you shared that, because I really do love the word "and." I think it's really important. I think it just makes the world bigger. And I think we're often forced into decisions that we don't actually have to make. Some decisions we really have to make and are really important. But some, we can have a marble loaf cake. We can have, not all chocolate, just a little, that kind of thing. So yeah, it speaks to something bigger, but it's also just a really delicious and really easy recipe. And I think speaks to a lot of the recipes in this book. And I'm going to walk you through very quickly how I make it. You guys all have the recipe if you want to make it with me. I've measured out ingredients, so I might go a little faster than you, but this is by no means a competition. And I just basically feel like food should never feel competitive in any way. It should feel totally comforting. So I'm going to show you, but you've got the recipe, so you can make it whenever you'd like, or you can just watch. So it starts with, the reason that it's a little bit different in this book than just a regular pound cake is I add a lot of coconut products in it because I love coconut. So it's a slightly sort of, I don't know, me take, or a maybe more modern take. I don't know if coconut was available in the old country by any means. I know you had coconut and baked goods at the bakery. But that is, I think, what makes this a little bit more perhaps modern in this cookbook. Again, can't choose between vanilla, chocolate, coconut. I love them all, so I put them all in to the recipe. So in this bowl, I have all the dry ingredients, which are, I will just tell you, 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, and then 1/2 cup of coconut flour, which is probably the most unusual ingredient in the cookbook, but it's become very widely available. And the reason I use it is it just adds amazing coconut flavor, and it also makes the final crumb of this cake, like the texture of it, it makes it so tender. I just think it's really worth seeking out, but you do not have to go out of your way to get it. If you are not interested in finding coconut flour, you can just use 2 cups of all-purpose flour altogether. It will still turn out really, really nicely. I also have 2 teaspoons of baking powder and a teaspoon of salt. The salt doesn't make it salty, it just adds more flavor. It sort of brings up the flavor of everything else. And the baking powder obviously gives it a little rise. So you're not eating a doorstop. So I'm just whisking together the dry ingredients. This is instead of sifting them. And what's happening right now when I'm whisking is I'm making a mess, first of all, important to home cooking. Second, I'm mixing that leavening, the baking powder and the salt in so they're evenly distributed. And I'm also adding a little air as if I were sifting, but you don't have to go to the trouble of sifting. So now in this bowl, you know what? I'm going to tilt this down a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm back on my stool. So in this bowl, I'm going to crack 2 eggs. This bowl is just for my shells. Otherwise, if I wasn't doing this for you, I would just throw them in the trash, but that's a little far away. But I really hate dirtying extra bowls. So that's why I'm pointing it out, because you don't need the little bowl. So I'm just going to crack 2 eggs. And in all my talking, I just cracked them into the wrong bowl. So I'm going to put them in here. I'm going to put my shells in here. Put those over here. My mom can confirm later, when I was a kid, I learned to cook from watching people cook on television. So I saw everyone take the dirty dishes and just put them to the side like I just did. I didn't know you actually had to wash the dishes. That is something I've learned. So I'm just going to whisk the eggs before I put in any of the other ingredients, just to whisk, the yolks and whites together. So that's it. And the other liquid ingredients, I'm going to put 1/2 cup of, I have canola oil. You could use vegetable oil. You could use melted coconut oil. I think that probably is what I should have done in the recipe. I just didn't have any on hand when I wrote the recipe. But I always have canola oil in my cupboard. So that's why I add that. And then this is a cup of full fat coconut milk, which adds so much flavor. And also the fat makes it really tender. This loaf can stay on your counter for a few days. It won't dry out. It doesn't last that long in my house, but in yours maybe. So a cup of coconut milk. And this was in a can. I just put it in here because I thought it looked a little nicer. And if your coconut milk, when you open your can, sometimes it's really smooth and pours well, and sometimes it's a little thicker and sort of separated, the fat and liquid. If that's the case, just put it into a bowl and whisk it together or stick it in a blender. You basically want to get it all really nice and smooth. So the other liquid ingredient is a tiny bit of almond extract. I find most things that are coconut flavored are actually flavored with almond. You can use coconut extract if you have it, but I love the flavor of almond extract. That is something I absolutely inherited from my mother, who loves all things almond. And a little bit is very powerful. So I'm just adding a quarter teaspoon. I am not afraid of flavor. So I'm telling you, if a quarter teaspoon is enough for me, I think it really is. It's good for this. If you love it, you can by all means add more. And some people, I don't understand this, but I accept it. Some people don't love almond extract, so you can leave it out. It won't change the texture or anything. So I'm just going to mix the liquid ingredient, and then I'm going to add, this is a cup of sugar. And as far as like a pound cake where this kind of recipe goes, a cup of sugar to me is on the lower end of sugar. A lot of recipes like this have up to 2 cups of sugar. I basically am not afraid of ingredients like flour or sugar. I just want to use them with consideration. And I love my baked goods like just barely sweet. I'm seeing a question pop up. Sorry, I'm a little far away from my computer, so I'm leaning over. Can you use almond flour instead of the coconut flour? Absolutely. That's a great question, Lisa. Thank you for asking. You can absolutely do that. I think it would turn out really well. And then you can just have an almond cake. So I'm whisking the sugar in with those liquid ingredients. And then once that's all combined, which it is, I'm going to throw my whisk over my shoulder into my sink. But I'm just going to pour the dry ingredients in here, but hold on to this bowl. Don't wash it. We're going to use it in a minute. So I'm just stirring my flour mixture into these liquid ingredients. And basically, the way we get a marble loaf is we take this batter and we're going to split it into 2. So I'm going to put half back in this bowl. Again, I'm a home cook who writes for other home cooks. As I've mentioned, I feel like already at least once, I don't love doing dishes. I'll do them, but my passion is not doing dishes. My passion is cooking and baking. So I don't want to wash an extra bowl if I don't have to, and I don't think anyone else does either. So I try to think of things like this, like don't rinse out this bowl. It's basically clean. It just had, flour in it. So I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm not weighing anything or measuring anything. You can if you'd like, but I'm going to put half of this batter into this bowl. So let's see. And it's okay if this is not like perfectly even. It's no big deal. And then the way we get a marble loaf is we're going to turn one of these batters into a chocolate batter. And the way I'm going to do that, sorry, it's not under here. I just dropped my towel. So I'm right next to my stove. You can see there's a little pot here. I have had, while we're talking, or while I'm talking, I have had this little pot here. It's got about 1 inch of water. So the water is not touching the top, which is a little stainless steel bowl. This could be glass, anything that's heat proof, don't use a plastic bowl basically. And in this bowl, I had half a cup of just semi-sweet chocolate chips, like whatever you would use in chocolate chip cookies. If you have a chocolate bar, you can chop that up. Totally fine. And I just had that water on just a simmer, not boiling, just a simmer. And those chocolate chips, I'm holding this with a towel because it gets hot. I'm going to show you those chocolate chips have melted into totally smooth, wonderful melted chocolate. So I'm going to put this melted chocolate into one of the bowls of batter. And this melted chocolate left on the bowl, I'm going to save for myself to enjoy later when I'm not on Zoom. And then I'm just going to mix this melted chocolate into this bowl of batter. So you get 2 batters for the price of 1. I love recipes that give you just like a lot of, sort of bang for your buck without too much effort. So now I've got 2 batters. Then I'm going to spray, this is just a standard loaf pan like you would use for banana bread or whatever. I'm going to spray it with a little cooking spray. I have this one, it's an olive oil one. I just use it for everything. It's not going to add like flavor to this, but if you have a special baking spray, regular Pam, whatever you want. And then I'm going to do something a little funny, but I learned this trick once, because when you spray this in a pan, sometimes extra goes around. So you have to forgive me turning my back to you. But if you open your dishwasher with dirty dishes, not clean dishes, but if you open your dishwasher and hold your pan here and spray it, you get really just like nice even coverage, and you're not spraying your whole kitchen with oil. So I'm gonna just tilt that up a little bit. That is a trick I just really enjoy. So to get the marbleized effect in the loaf, I'm just gonna take spoonfuls at a time of this, the two different batters, and just alternate them. This is a moment in baking when I think people get a little stressed out, like, oh, should it be an exact amount or an exact order? And I'm just here to say it doesn't have to be exact. I'm just putting like a big dollop of the chocolate, like that, and then a dollop of this one. And I'm gonna try and put chocolate where I put the, I don't wanna call it vanilla, I guess the coconut one, and try to just not put the same one on top of each other. And that's gonna give you the marbleized effect. So I'm gonna keep doing this until it's done. And then I'm gonna put it into my oven, which is set at 350 degrees. And it's gonna bake for about an hour, like an hour and 5 minutes. And I'll know when it's done when the top is really nice and firm. The kitchen is gonna smell amazing. It's gonna smell like chocolate and coconut. And if you put a toothpick or a skewer inside, you know, you poke it inside, it will come out clean. And this is something that really benefits from letting it cool down before you eat it. It will not crumble and fall apart. I think also the flavor is a little bit better when it's room temperature as opposed to warm. But if you cannot wait, I totally understand, and you can dive in. So I will keep layering, but I'm going to show you the end product in real life, which is you cut into it and it looks like this, which is just so fun. And I'm just showing everyone the fact that because I wanted to show you the middle, I cut off the end, but then I got hungry, so I cut off the other end too. Yeah, no, sometimes you might get like more chocolate just depending on where the batter was, but that's sort of the fun of it. It's like a discovery. But this is also especially funny because as my mom and I were talking about earlier with some of you, my mother loves the ends of anything, the end of any loaf of bread or a cake. So as an ode to my mom, I've eaten the ends. But this is what the final product will look like. This is just, as you can see, it's a pretty easy recipe. And I think it's really impressive looking, even though it's really easy to make. I really enjoy that in recipes. And I just really hope you enjoy it. It's great for breakfast. It's great with coffee. It's great for a snack. It's a great thing to like bring to a neighbor. You know, I could go on. It's just like a really easy, wonderful, homey thing to make. So can we see, sorry, let me just see what the question is. Can we see inside the pan how the batter looks? Yes, absolutely. I'm not done layering, but so far it looks like, can you see this? I don't want to tilt it too much and have it fall out, but I'm sort of putting these alternating scoops. I hope that kind of shows it, and I'll keep scooping away. But Ellen, would you like to join us while I finish scooping?
I would. Thank you so much. So I was so struck by your mother's story about your love of the word and I think it's so descriptive of your spirit and so much of what you wrote in your cookbook. So I wanted to ask you about equity at the table.
Sure.
What is it, and how did you come to think of this creative idea?
Absolutely. I'm going to stop scooping for a second. Equity at the Table is a website. You can, well, don't go to it right now because we're talking, but you can go to it right when we're done, or, you know, in the window next to us. It's equityatthetable.com. It's very easy and fun to remember because the acronym is EATT with 2 T's. And Equity at the Table is a digital directory. It's a database. And it includes women and non-binary and gender non-conforming individuals, and all within the food industry, which the food industry I think of as like a huge umbrella with so many industries underneath it. And we prioritize and feature anyone who identifies as part of the LGBTQ community and or is a person of color. And we basically do that to center the voices that have just traditionally not been centered, which I know is part of your history as well, Ellen. And the reason I started this database, which I did with the support of a wonderful advisory board, a wonderful web developer, because that is not my expertise. I thought, oh, we're making a list. Like, how hard could that be? Like, I make grocery lists all the time. Like, but building a digital list where you can search in a variety of ways, from you can search by profession, by location, and or by identification. That's a little bit more complicated. So I had a lot of support building it, and it's something I'm just not only proud of, but I'm just very grateful it exists. And I think what happens when you visit Equity at the Table are some really practical things. So sorry, you can still see me, right? Sorry, my screen just jumped for a second. Some really practical things happen when you visit Equity at the Table. You can, if you're in a position to hire or feature someone, maybe you, like my mom has been, maybe you're a magazine editor, or maybe you are organizing a conference. Maybe you are part of a religious institution and you get to feature or hire speakers to do things like I'm getting to do right now. This is a really helpful resource. It's a place where you can go and find people if you're hiring for any kind of job or featuring, whatever it might be. And I think some really deep emotional kind of community building things also happen. People who are on the site, members, we get to connect with each other. We get to sort of meet each other and just see each other. I think another thing that's really simple but really powerful is you can just scroll through and see how many people do so many amazing things from so many different places who come from so many different backgrounds. And I think the power of just seeing that represented visually is like not to be underestimated. And excuse me, there's a few details about Equity at the Table that I really love. It's incredibly simple, and I do think that's the key to its success. I feel like in talking about it, I'm making it sound even more complicated than it is. It's very, very simple and very straightforward. It also, the site, when you load it, I can't remember exactly how many times a day this happens, but it randomizes. So you're never seeing like the same person at the top. And to me, that's a really important detail, because it's not the same person being featured over and over. You're getting to see everyone. And I think the other thing that's really powerful that happens is, to me, when I just load the site, just as a viewer of it, not as a member or the founder or whatever, when I just look at it, I am just reminded that we live with abundance and not scarcity. And I think it's a different mindset. And I think if anyone here has ever felt marginalized in any way, which I think a mostly Jewish community probably is familiar with that feeling, I think if you know that feeling, you know how isolating it can be and how it can feel like there's only room for one of us. And I think we're made to feel that way often. Or maybe there's not room for any of us, whatever it might be. And with Equity at the Table, I think for me, it's just a reminder that there is room for all of us, and there are many of us, and we're not alone, and we're not, I mentioned, like, if anyone's making this loaf with me right now, like, it's not a competition. I mean that seriously, because I think we're made to feel we're always in a rush into the whatever, to the top, to the oven, whatever it might be, to bake this, it's just, we're not in a rush, and I think we can do things together. And I think it's a good reminder of that. So that's a little bit about it. And I think for me, how it fits into my work is I write recipes for a living. Like, I am very invested in giving really helpful tools and making things just simple and useful. Like, that is very much what I'm invested in, just professionally and personally. So that's a little bit more about it. And I appreciate you asking about it.
Oh, thank you so much for telling us about it. I really loved learning even more about it than I think is in your book. And just you're talking about your recipes, that's what you do. It made me think of another one of your essays that was so interesting, which is the connection for you between recipes and singing. And I wonder if you could talk to us about that.
Sure.
It's so interesting.
Sure. And it's so funny to talk about that with my mom, because my mom, so before we all got on the Zoom together, some of us all the people responsible for making this happen and behind the scenes. We were on Zoom, I guess the Zoom waiting room or whatever it's called. And my mom sang for a little bit. So my mom is a much more enthusiastic, I think, singer than I am, which is worth mentioning because I think it's part of why it's something I've wanted to learn how to do. So to give you a little bit of background, I don't consider myself a shy person, and I feel like I can talk to just about anyone. I'm not too nervous to talk in front of a big group of people. I know there's a lot of people here tonight, even though I'm just looking at you, Ellen, and my mom, so I feel like very intimate. But that said, I've always had a very hard time speaking up, just literally, not like standing up for myself, but being loud, being heard. Like, so if we were sitting together in a room with everyone here, I feel like the people in the back rows might not be able to hear me right now. It's part of why I'm really happy we're doing this on Zoom. I'm just not very loud. And I've had a hard time reconciling that I can stand up for myself, but I can't speak up. And what's that about? And then I think about someone like my mom, who's not afraid to just start singing with a bunch of people she doesn't know. And so I did something that scared me, but I thought was really useful, which was I went to a singing workshop. I didn't go for any reason to do with food or my work whatsoever. I went for the personal reason of wanting to learn how to be a little bit louder and not so afraid of my voice. So I went to this singing workshop, which is just a really funny story, and it was just a riot. But I basically spent the whole weekend, like an entire weekend, singing with this group of people, a group of all women. And our instructor would sing, and then we would sing back to her. It was like kind of call and response. So she never gave us a workbook or music sheets or anything like that. And I spent the entire weekend being completely present, a mixture of completely terrified, but also completely excited. I loved it. I had so much fun. And then when I got home on Sunday afternoon, I walked through the door and my wife, Grace, was like, how was it? And I was like, it was amazing. Like I wasn't afraid at the end. Like it was so great. It was so meaningful. And then she said, great, like, so sing me a song. And I said, okay. And then I stopped and I said, I can't remember a single one. And she was like, how is that possible? You just spent all weekend doing this. Like, how do you, like, it wasn't the next day or even a week later. Like I was singing that morning. Like this place isn't that far away from me. And I couldn't remember any lyrics. I couldn't remember any songs. And it hit me in that moment. It was like a light bulb moment when I realized this is why recipes matter. And this is why recipes are important, because someone can be completely present, as I was, for this exchange of information. And it can even be like inspiring and exciting. And then you can get home a few hours later and not remember it. So I can sit with you, Ellen, in your kitchen. You can show me your favorite things to cook. You can allow me to taste it while you're making it. You can tell me every step you're doing. But if I don't have a recipe, I might not remember how to recreate this, even if I don't follow the recipe to a T. And this lesson has really helped me understand how valuable all recipes, not just my own, but all recipes and all cookbooks are, because they hold this valuable information, but they also give us this way where we can get back into a memory. We can get back into feeling present and connected. Mm-hmm. And it really clarified things for me, because I don't always follow recipes. I actually never do unless I'm writing them. I cook very intuitively, and sometimes I haven't known how to reconcile the fact that I write recipes, but I don't follow them. And I realized from that singing workshop, like, really, I think why they're so valuable. So maybe now my mom can sing you what I just said. No, I'm just kidding.
Do you have anything you want to add to that, Rochelle?
I'm not a singer.
You sounded pretty
You're
good
not
to
afraid
me.
to sing.
I'm not afraid. No, because I think that there are a lot of things like poetry or creating art or singing that you lose your self-consciousness doing. And then you become very, very present. And I think that's important for all of us, to find our way, whether it's being in nature or being in prayer, finding, losing the self-consciousness that keeps you from really experiencing something profound.
Oh, that's so beautiful, and it just actually ties into the next thing I I have so many questions that I want to ask. So many questions, so little time. But you talk in your book, Julia, about cooking and social anxiety and food image. And I think it must touch on what your mom was just talking about. But I was wondering if you could tell us how you see the connection between cooking and those kinds of anxieties that we all experience one way or another.
Absolutely. First, I'm just going to quickly show you the top of this because I was listening. I forgot to finish.
So pretty.
Parking this in the oven.
I just wanted to mention before Julia answers that Julia loves coconut. And for her bat mitzvah, we had 13 individual coconut cakes made. So when the candles were put in and people came up to wish her well, there was this parade of coconut. I'm sorry that I distracted from the last question. But
That's great.
I'm happy you added that. I think it's a reminder of, as much as I love simple food, I also love a statement. But yeah, Ellen, to your question, it really ties in so much with what my mom just said. So, the book just came out. I know not everyone, has it or might have it, but what Ellen is referring to is I wrote a ton of personal essays, not a ton, a handful of personal essays in this book. And they talk about things that have a lot to do with healthy comfort food that aren't necessarily tied to an individual recipe. It's just more thoughts about my feelings about, what defines that, what defines healthy comfort food. And one of those essays is about anxiety and cooking. And I think talking about mental health and the intersection of mental health and cooking, to me, is a very important thing to talk about in a book about healthy comfort food. So some of the things I talk about in that essay are that I have, I've always skewed anxious, which is something, my mom and I talk about our anxiety, both our individual and our collective anxiety. This is like a topic of conversation regularly. I don't know if any other Jewish mothers and daughters are listening and identify with this. I have a feeling maybe some do. And in these kinds of conversations, the more I understand about how my anxiety has manifested for me, I know it's very different for everyone, but for me, what I've come to understand about when I feel anxious, I cannot be anxious and present at the same time, unless it's like an intense emergency. And the reason why that was really important for me to understand was because my anxiety is usually me worrying about something that happened that I can't change, or worrying about something that is going to happen. And when I'm present, that's not happening. When I'm in the moment, I'm not anxious. And the reason I'm just talking about that now is because one of the quickest, easiest, and like most daily ways I can access that feeling of being present is when I'm in my kitchen. I mean, as you saw, I just had to stop scooping the batter because we were talking. Like, I can't cook and also like connect in this way at the same time. When I'm cooking, when I'm baking, I get to be so present. And if I am not, it's not the thing I enjoy. I enjoy so much that I get to be so present. And there aren't that many activities that engage all of our senses in the way cooking does. So it gives me access to thinking about, like, I wish you all were here so you could smell, like, the batter smells so good. Like, I can smell the coconut. I can look at this loaf and, the finished product, and like, I can see how beautiful it is. I can, obviously taste it. Like, all these things come in. And those things really help me to be a less anxious person, which I think is valuable. I think also there's other things about cooking that really help me with anxiety, which is connecting with other people. I have a much easier time inviting someone over for something to eat than I do just saying, do you want to hang out? It gives me this kind of access, this way in. And I think cooking for me often, and I know I share this with you, Mom, cooking has also been a really nice way for me to disengage if I'm feeling a little like this is too much. So maybe like a family holiday thing, my mom and I basically raced to go do the dishes because we both want to step out of the meal just for a minute, to collect our thoughts, to kind of ground ourselves. So I think cooking gives us access to that kind of, time with ourselves when we are with other people. As much as we want to connect, sometimes we have to balance that a little bit, like a marble loaf. We want both.
Yeah. So, Rochelle, you told me a story about your bakery and it was a story about soup. Do you remember that story about sharing the soup with other people who needed food?
I don't. Could you?
I think it might be the story. Is this the story about your mom, and
right,
moving the meat
yeah,
in the soup?
Yeah, that I remember. It was yes, in Russia, where my mother was growing up, and she was the daughter of a baker. That bakery had a little restaurant attached to it as well. And the ovens were quite big. They did mostly baking. And on the Sabbath, people would bring in their pots, a chalant, a stew, and they would put the stew in the ovens to keep warm, because you couldn't cook on the Sabbath until Sabbath was over. They would use the ovens, which stayed warm even though no one was using them, to keep the stew warm. And my mother, as a young girl, would take the meat out of the pots, not all the meat. She would take a little piece of the meat out of the pots of the richer people and put it into the pots of the poorer people, is what she did in that store. And it was just, so it was, you talk about equity and you talk about helping people out. I don't think anybody noticed. She never got into trouble for it, but it just, for me, it was a place setter in my life about what you could do. So that I always remember that very, very fondly about her. She was a little mischievous, but for good reasons.
I was so very touched by that story that I remembered it, and I was just thinking that it was Lador Vador, generation to generation, because Julia is so involved with volunteer work and food. And I was wondering if you could share that with us, Julia. Tell us some of the things that you do.
Sure, I would love to, and I think I appreciate having this kind of background already shared, because I don't know, something I've been thinking about a lot, because I have the opportunity to do something like this, to be the one that you're all listening to, which is surreal for me. As much as I love to talk, clearly, I really love listening. So I think about the fact that I often get asked to talk about my volunteering and stuff like that, which I'm so happy to talk about, because it's such an important part of my life. And I know it's an important part, that's hard to say, of your community. But I also think, sometimes I think about that, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I would like to be more like my grandmother and not do it to get any pat on the back type of thing. I love these stories about my grandmother, how it was just part of her life. And it was something she did without asking for any permission at all. She just did it. I love thinking about her as a young girl moving meat from one pot to another, like this little miniature Robin Hood, who just didn't ask anyone. I just think that's so wonderful. So I just wanted to share that thought. But yeah, in terms of the volunteering I do, it is just a part of my week. It's a part of my routine. And so, for a little bit more context, I know most of you are in the Philadelphia area. I live in the Hudson Valley. I'm about 3 hours from Philadelphia, about 2 hours from New York City. And I used to live in New York City and spent the majority of my life in the city. And before my wife and I moved here, I used to volunteer pretty regularly at God's Love We Deliver, which is an amazing organization based in Soho in Manhattan. And it started in 1985, which I remember because that's also when I started. And they started serving clients who are living with HIV and AIDS. They've grown to serve clients who have over 200 different diagnoses, and within just the tri-state area. And in the past year, they made close to 2.5 million meals, and they serve not just their clients, but also people around them if they need. So if there's like a single mother going through cancer treatment, and if her child also needs to be fed, like they'll feed the child as well. And they do all of this for free for their clients. I happen to know all these statistics because I just, my most recent podcast episode was all about them. So it's like very much in my head, but I love the work they do. I'm grateful for the work they do, especially because of the direct impact it has. And the way it is just so, I don't know, gives a lot of personalization and dignity to each of their clients. I think that's really important and valuable. So when we moved here, I missed that. I missed going and I missed having a regular volunteer shift. And I looked for something similar in our area. And I was very lucky to stumble upon an organization called Angel Food East, which is based in Kingston, New York, which is like half an hour from where Grace and I live. And we have been going regularly to do a shift every week for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. And it has just been this wonderful part of our routine and a way to connect with a community that we were new to, a way to get to know people in our community, you know, not just to serve our community. And as a freelancer, it's part of why I love volunteering. This was just a sidebar, is it gives me this regular anchor on my schedule, which I really value. It also allows me to always put things in perspective. If I'm ever stressed out, or, you know, worked up about something, I always feel less so when I leave our shift. I find it very, very grounding and very helpful. And we also do a lot of work with our local food pantry, some other things in our community. But, you know, when people ask me how I found Angel Food East, I think this advice applies wherever you are. I Googled the word volunteer and my zip code. I found different organizations. I called around. I tried volunteering at a few places. And I think finding a regular volunteer shift is like any other relationship. Like sometimes you have to meet a few different people. You know, you have to find the right fit. And for me, all of this community work I do is completely through food, because this is what I love. So this is what I will show up for weekly, you know. So I think it doesn't have to be cooking. If you know, if you don't like to cook, that shouldn't be how you get back to your community, because you probably won't enjoy it. Like, I think finding something that you are excited to show up for, that you can sustain, and that, you know, in many ways, Mom, that you and I have talked about, like with your mother and things you've done, like things you're passionate about and you would do anyway. I think that to me is the key of just weaving it into your fabric.
So much of what you just said resonates with me so completely, Julia, because we have a program at Road of Shalom called Breaking Bread on Broad,
Yes.
where we distribute food to food insecure families in our neighborhood. And so it's always on Wednesday. So it's created that same structure for us. And we've gotten to know the community, but we've also gotten to know each other, the volunteer community.
Yeah.
So so much of what you said just speaks to me about the beauty of volunteering. But you mentioned in the middle of your answer about your podcast, which is Stay Calm and Cook On. Do I have it right?
Yeah. No, that would be better. It's Keep Calm and Cook On.
Keep Calm
I like
and Cook
Stay
On.
Calm. You can call it whatever you want.
Could you? I've listened to your podcast, which you can get on Stitcher, and they are so witty and relaxed and wonderful. Could you just talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. I started my podcast a few years ago. I guess it was like in 2018, and the way I was talking about sort of like anxiety, but using food as kind of a way in. If you really want to talk to people you really like, respect, and admire, but don't know how to start that conversation, I really recommend starting a podcast, because then you can reach out and then you can ask them whatever you want. So that is basically why I started a podcast. I wanted to talk a little bit more deeply and closely with a lot of my colleagues and a lot of people just in and around food who I respect their work and I admire it. And I respect the way they do it. And I just wanted to have these conversations. I wanted to have, honestly, more moments like the one I believe we're experiencing right now, to have a connection that feels, a conversation that feels connected and feels present, you know, all the things we've been talking about. And I found a podcast was a nice medium for that. You know, so much of my work is on the page. So much of my work is about writing and about images and the time it takes for these things to come together, which I love. But I also love with the podcast, it's very immediate. I don't have to wait for it to be printed. And it also means it's a much more accessible format. You know, it's free, you know, anyone can listen, which I think is really amazing. So I like having kind of a mix of mediums. And I also think some things are better talked about than written about, or not better, just, you know, nice. And it's just been really nice to connect with people. So I've done, it's now over 50 episodes. I've talked to just a range of people. And one of the best parts of it is honestly, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, Mom, but I didn't start the podcast so that my mom could listen to it. That wasn't like, my plan wasn't to have some like, I don't know, like passive, like indirect, like plan. But I think in sharing these what have become very like personal conversations with people and sharing them with whoever wants to listen, and I'm very lucky to include my mom as one of my regular listeners, I've gotten to share a lot with you, Mom, that I don't know if it would have come up if, you know, you hadn't listened to the conversation. And it's given me a way to invite my family and specifically my mom into things that I don't know that we would have just talked about if, you know, I mean, my mom and I, we talk often, very regularly, but there are certain things I just wouldn't necessarily think to bring up with you, but I've really loved and enjoyed discussing with you. And it's been one of these things where I feel like with a lot of creative work, sometimes you have a plan. Like I make cookbooks. I know that I want them to be, you know, in people's kitchens and used. I want you to have these recipes that I think are really easy and delicious. And the stuff I can't plan or predict is conversations like this that will come out of that. And it's the same with the podcast. Like I didn't go into it with this plan that it would leave me more connected with my mom. That didn't occur to me, but I think in many ways it has. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, Mom, but
No, but it's one of those wonderful consequences that I've appreciated, because I really do feel that you never really know everything about anybody. Even those that are closest to you, you just never know. And this was a great way of revealing things that are worth continuing in conversation, which to me has been wonderful.
Yeah, so it's just so evident in this conversation that we've shared that you have this wonderful relationship between the two of you. And when I started really looking at the art in the book, I don't know if you can see, but the photos are so clean and very beautiful. Every single photo in the book is like that. And I was wondering how you influenced each other in the creation of art, in the cooking, in the creation of cookbooks, because your fields are interwoven.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say that everything I know about making a book look nice, for lack of better words, I'm all of a sudden very inarticulate. Everything I know about images and the kind of details about design and everything about the way a book looks and feels, all of that I have learned from my parents. So I will let my mom answer this because I don't know how to explain it. You've taught me all of that. So
well, yeah. I think one of the ways I've learned that you could bring change in the world is to change the way you see something. And I think that if you could present, I think that we've become so much more a visual culture as never before, that today, if you could bring an image that becomes powerful, you know, I spent a lot of time in publishing and in advertising and marketing. So if you could bring an image that quickly relates, I think it would be, it's important. My mother didn't read or write any language. She was illiterate, but incredibly intelligent. And that lesson of growing up in a household where my mother didn't read or write was very important to me, because I've learned to be able to make points or send messages to people that don't necessarily know how to do it. If you're selling products into a Walmart and 10% of their population doesn't read or write English, you've got to use other means to attract them. So I've learned to communicate a little bit, and I think it's a very powerful language to be able to use visual cues to help people get there. So, and Julia does this intuitively. Both of us, both Julia and I, have a love of common things, you know, that you could find. You don't have to find beauty necessarily in luxury. You can find beauty in a teacup. You can find beauty in the way a napkin falls on a table and appreciate it. The way you could smell the aroma of food cooking or taste it. You can also see and get great pleasure out of just ordinary things that you have in your house.
Mom, so, I have to interrupt you for 1 second. I'm so sorry. I have to interrupt you just to share that of the many things that you and I do talk about and share, we're always saving pieces of cardboard for each other from like packages we get. I'm always like, this is such a good piece of cardboard, or look how beautiful how they pack this. This is mostly what we talk about. So I just wanted to share that. Please continue.
No, I love different textures of things. And I actually do love different forms of cardboard. I know that must sound crazy to people, but one of my jobs when I was growing up in the bakery was my father would give me a stack of unfolded boxes. And my job was to close one side of them. So you could use the other side to slip a cake in, and it was set up halfway. So one of my jobs was to make half of the half boxes whole and stacks of them. That was one of my jobs. So I really began to appreciate, you know, it's like when you open a box and it comes in the mail and it has beautiful tissue paper or a little ribbon wrapped around it. Julia actually sends presents now with bakery string, the red and white string. She ties them up with that, you know, so it's a trigger, it's a reminder. And I also think that there it is, famous bakery string. It's the thread, the literal thread that keeps us all together. Holds
Good one, Mom.
Yeah. So so that's part of the cue. And I really do believe that you can, whether it's choosing the right word as a signal or you know, smile. If you genuinely smile at someone, genuinely smile. Not like a toothpaste commercial. You actually, it's a hello. It's a welcome. And I think those are the kinds of cues that Julia embraces in all of her work.
Mom, can I ask you to share? I'm so sorry, Ellen. I feel like you're about to ask a question.
No, please.
Mom, can you share, because this to me really exemplifies everything you're talking about, and it's one of my favorite stories. Can you share about basically with your mother not reading or writing any language, but basically your start in like graphic design and how that happened with her telephone?
Oh, okay. All right. My mother could read numbers, and she always did the math in the bakery in her head. She could, you know, you came and you bought something, she could do the math in her head. But so she could read numbers, and I wanted to provide for her a way of figuring out who to call on the telephone. So I started as a kid drawing on little cards or cardboard or whatever was around a picture of a cake, and then it had the number of the bakery below it, the telephone number of the bakery. So she had that card, or she wanted to reach my sister who was then married, and it had a picture of I drew a picture of my sister and my other sister with a nephew, and they were like little little cards that would be up there, that so if she needed to, she could reach people because she could read the numbers. So that's how I worked out this. And I was a little, you know, I just knew that you could find a solution graphically. And I'm a great believer that you know, these things that we use in graphics should disappear. They should become second to the function. It shouldn't be like you're looking at it and go, oh, that's a great graphic design. It should be, oh my God, that functions so well. And I learned that. Self-taught, I guess, I don't know.
Oh,
Thank you so much for explaining how you found your way into the art world in such a sort of poignant way as a way to help your mother. I mean, it's just lovely. So I can see that there are comments in the chat, but Jeff, they're not on my messages, so I can't access them. Are there some questions that people are asking that I'm missing?
There was a question about adopting the marble loaf for Passover.
oh. I think it could be done. I haven't thought this through, but I can think it through out loud right now. So what would we have to do? We would have to maybe take out the all-purpose flour and the baking powder. Is that the question, basically? I think that you could make this with probably a mixture of, I haven't tried this, obviously, so I can't say. I think you could make this with a mixture of almond flour and coconut flour. I love that question about the almond flour earlier. And I think in substitute of the baking powder, to add some leavening, some lift to this, the eggs that I whipped, I would separate the egg whites and egg yolks, and I would whisk the egg whites so they're very, very stiff peaks. And I would actually maybe use like 4 egg whites and maybe just 2 egg yolks. And then after you mix the batter, I would fold those egg whites in to add some levity. And if you try this, please let me know how it turns out, because I think it sounds really good. It's a little bit more work, but I think it could be really worth it and delicious. So I think that would work really well. And I will just say, I just really appreciate you sharing that story, Mom. And like Ellen said, I think it's just such a beautiful story. And, you know, this idea of using essentially graphic design, which I'm sure as a young kid, you didn't even know what those words meant, but you were doing it from this very, you know, innate place. And I think from this desire to help someone you love do something and connect. And I think, I don't know, that just really resonates with me as someone who tries to do that in my work in other ways. And I think also this idea of like the best types of design, you know, my mom is, I know you heard a little bit in her bio, but like my mom is really, really good at this. She has like a really amazing background in this and has so many experiences. And I'm very, very lucky to have both her and my dad at the end of a phone call whenever I need them for what I do for a living. I mean, in general, but especially for what I do for a living, because being able to explain what you want a page to look like before the page exists is a very hard thing to do. My parents have really helped give me this vocabulary. And I really resonate with this idea of like, when it's at its best, you don't know it's there, like it disappears. And to me, that is something that I hope happens in many ways with my recipes. That my hope is that they're supportive enough, they give you all the information that you can make it and forget it was mine. It can become yours. You know, this can be Ellen's great marble loaf that like everyone asks you for.
It should only happen.
And I think also
I do plan on cooking my way through the book. I have to tell you. But that sense of intimacy and you refer to yourself as being a cookbook writer for home cooks, and that you see yourself as being a home cook. And you touched on this earlier, but I really wanted to ask you more about it, that you say that it's healthy comfort food. And you know, we think of comfort food, we think of mac and cheese, we think of mashed potatoes, we think of things that maybe aren't the healthiest things. And so I was wondering if you could talk to us about what does it mean to have healthy comfort food?
Sure. I really appreciate you asking this. And I just want to say, before I go on some tangent, which I'm sure I'm about to, that I think macaroni and cheese and mashed potatoes are healthy. And when I say that, what I'm saying is, if they make you feel comforted, if they make you feel taken care of, especially if you're providing that for yourself, to me, that is a very healthy act. And I think
always
it's really
feel guilty.
Well, you know, what's really interesting is I wrote a book of healthy comfort food. I wrote a healthy cookbook that has nothing to do with weight loss, that has nothing to do with restriction or deprivation, and has absolutely nothing to do with guilt. And I know guilt is a feeling many of us Jews feel in general, but I think especially when it comes to eating, it's something that a lot of us feel. I know I've felt often. And I have over the years really tried to build a very new relationship to myself and to my body that doesn't really leave any room for guilt or restriction, and to kind of redefine healthy from what I used to understand it to mean, which was just a synonym for thin, for skinny. You know, I equated it with weight loss. And this is something, Mom, you and I have talked so much about, because, you know, I think about how many people feel the same way, and it's because of, you know, seeing pictures in magazines and measuring themselves against them. And I always think, I grew up in a house where, you know, you were making these pages. You know, this is really ingrained in all of us. I know, like, we all live in this very diet culture world. But I feel like I saw it in this very different way at home. So I think this was something we both, you know, worked through. And I will say, talking to my mom about this very openly and honestly has been a big, huge part about me coming to a much more positive place with it, being able to have like this honest conversation. So for me in this book, I define healthy. It has nothing to do with any numbers, you know, anything to do with calories or anything. It has entirely to do with how we feel when we cook and when we eat. And for so long, I've always felt so happy and positive when I'm cooking. I've always loved to cook. My mom can tell you, since I'm a little kid, I just want to be in the kitchen. I didn't watch cartoons. I watched CBS cooking shows. My mom used to send me I subscribed to Gourmet since I don't know how old I was. And you would send me the copies at camp because I couldn't wait to get home at the end of the summer to read them. Like, I needed to read it in July. And I haven't always felt as happy and as positive when it comes to eating. I've felt very fraught, and I've had a hard time not just like accepting my body, but being happy about it. And I just thought, wow, I can be so happy about cooking. I can love it so much. I can have this curiosity about it. I can have this fearlessness about it. I can not worry about getting something wrong. Like, I feel like each time I get something wrong when I'm cooking wrong, I'm just like, oh, I'm recipe testing. Like, I'm making it better for next time, right? And I just haven't felt that way with eating, and I've really wanted to. So I talk a lot about that in the book. And the way I define healthy in the book, first, I just encourage everyone to define it for yourself. I think it's a word we have to own and define for ourselves because it means something different to each of us. And for me, healthy means freedom. It feels like being free. It feels, when I feel healthy, I feel liberated. I feel connected to what I'm eating, connected to all the people, connected to the ingredients, and most importantly to myself. And I feel just calm and relaxed and not stressed, and in touch with what I want, and grateful that I get to have it. So that's how I feel.
Thank God. You know, I spent so many years in the magazine business, and I have to apologize for putting lines on the covers of magazines that actually, you know, said things where women had to assume that they had a problem that they never actually had, so that I could present an article where they could fix it. So I offer my apologies to many, many generations of women. I can't take it back, I wish, but I've learned a lot along the way, especially from my daughter.
Yeah, so it's so obvious from listening to Julia talking about going to camp and wanting to have cooking magazines to read, and you said, Julia, that you've always been cooking. It's been in your DNA. So are there any recipes from your childhood, from being in your mom's home and cooking, that you'd like to share with us? Like, what
Sure.
are the things that you loved growing up?
I thought you were going to ask me if there's anything else I like to do, and I was going to say, no, not really. I really thought that's what you were going to say. All of my work, but especially this book, I'm holding my copy because of the marble loaf recipe I needed to refer to. so many of the recipes in this book are childhood favorites of mine. You know, every podcast episode I host, each conversation is different, but I always end each conversation asking everyone what their favorite food was when they were growing up, because that's my favorite question. And I would actually, if you are willing to share, Ellen, later, I'd love to know yours. And I feel like I take this whole book trying to answer that question. There are so many foods I love from growing up. And honestly, I think one of the foods definitely I love most growing up is not a recipe in the cookbook, but it's matzo brie, because Mom, it was one of the only things you cooked, and you would make it like on weekends. But there is a recipe for babala, which are like matzo meal pancakes, which is a recipe that was very new to me. I had never heard of it before until you told me about it, Mom, because you told me your mother made it. And I just feel like it's worth sharing the photo, if you don't mind. But yeah, there's a whole breakfast chapter. So this is sort of an indirect answer to your question, Ellen, because it wasn't something I ate growing up, but it's something I just feel incredibly connected to. So I feel like the best way to describe it is they're almost like the mixture that you would turn into matzo balls, slightly different ratio, but instead of, you know, cooking it in stock or water or however you make your matzo balls, you take this mixture and use it like a pancake batter, and you fry it in butter. So the picture is not of the pancakes, it's of my grandmother, my mother's mother. And I love this picture so much, and I'm so glad it's in the book. But some other childhood favorites, one is in the first chapter, and it's, I feel like we talked, you know, obviously my mom's here, but in the other room next to my mom is my dad. And one of my favorite things to eat when I was growing up was my dad's meatloaf, which he made usually on Saturday night. Because you guys worked during the week, so we didn't really have like family dinner. So Saturday night was our night. And I think all of us, and by all of us, I mean you, Mom, me, and my brother Ben, I think one of our favorite things, all of us, was his meatloaf, which we referred to as Doug's famous meatloaf because it was famous amongst the four of us. And I took my dad's meatloaf and I turned it into a meatball recipe in this book, and it's his Tex-Mex meatloaf. And I just think it's the most ingenious thing, and it's so delicious. And instead of eggs and breadcrumbs, which are typically, you know, the things in meatloaf that stretch out, you know, meat to feed more people, and sort of like your mother, Mom, my dad substituted a jar of salsa for the eggs, and then crushed a bag of tortilla chips instead of the breadcrumbs, and then added a ton of cheddar cheese to it. And that's it. And it is so delicious. I can't even begin to tell you how good it is. And I make it with ground turkey because that's what my wife and I mostly eat. She doesn't really like red meat. And they're so, so good. And the only reason I turn them into meatballs instead of meatloaf is I'm just really impatient and they cook faster. So that's pretty much it. It's such a good recipe. It's such an easy thing to make. You know, the tortilla chips also make the recipe totally gluten-free, which I know doesn't matter to a lot of people, but does matter to some people. And, you know, if you have celiac disease or anything, meatloaf is something you normally can't enjoy. So this is there for everyone, but including those people. So yeah, those are two recipes that come to mind.
Oh, thank you for that. So I have to say that I've always thought there was a connection between food and memory. And I just have to say that when I was growing up, I'm a Brooklyn girl, and I go to my grandparents' house. My grandmother would always make me matzo meal pancakes. And so for me, the making of them, the taste of them just brings back my very happiest memories of being with my grandparents, who I loved so much. So I'm so glad that you shared that with us.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's really meaningful for me to hear. And, you know, because this wasn't something I had eaten before I wrote the recipe, which is not usually how I write recipes, I really relied on my mom and her stories, which was similar to yours. And Mom, you described them to me. I researched some recipes for these. And then you were sitting here, basically where my computer is. I was on this side of my kitchen counter, you know, next to the stove. And my mom was sitting on the other side of the counter, and I took out all the ingredients. I made the batter. I think I made one or two that were okay. And then I made one, and I think the ratio was right. I put the plate in front of you and you ate it, and you said it tastes like my mom, which to me is, I mean, I could burst into tears, but that is the best compliment coming from anyone. But from my mom about her mom is like, blows my mind. So yeah.
That's what I'm saying about this whole conversation. I feel like it's all about generation to generation. And, you know, that's just such a lovely note to sort of end on, because we're just about out of time.
Oh my gosh.
And
No, I had no idea.
we are. It's just flown by. I just cannot thank you both enough for this. Can I use the word enriching, this word delicious, to describe this conversation? And I'm just grateful to everyone who was involved in having you be able to be with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Ellen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a privilege
Ellen,
being with you all.
yeah, and meeting you, Ellen, has been such a delightful part of this. And it just reminds me that the minute we start talking about food, we get to know each other. And you know, Ellen, you, my mom and I haven't met in person, but, you know, we spoke, you know, once or twice before this, and it's just, I feel like you're part of our family. And I think that's what happens when we have conversations like this. So I really appreciate all of you being here and listening, and Mom, for you being here. And Ellen, I'm not sure if you can see on your computer, but I can see on mine in the chat. I just wanted to share something. Oh gosh, there's so many more comments. If anyone asked a question I didn't get to, I'm always around on Instagram and stuff if you want to ask me, but I just want to read Beth Packle from the congregation shared a story that I just think, I'm sorry if I'm going over the time. I just want
Rochelle, thank you so much, Julia, for doing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I just want my mom to hear this, because I don't know if you can see it, Mom, but Beth shared, which is so sweet. She said, I could not let this evening go without mentioning my mother, who would have turned 70 today. Sadly, she passed away 2 years ago. Beth, we are very sorry to hear that. Her name was Rochelle, and she was a fabulous baker. I know she would have loved listening to you both, so thank you for sharing your stories, and Beth will make the marble loaf. But Mom, I just wanted you to hear that, because I thought that was really amazing.
So sweet. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but grateful to hear that too. Also, I'm not a baker. I never had to. But I wish you all a wonderful holiday coming up soon. And Bubala is in the book.
So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Just, you know, like Julia said, you were amazing. And to Julia and Rochelle, we want you to know that post-pandemic, we look forward to welcoming you to visit us in person in Philadelphia.
We'd love it.
We'd love it. Just love it.
This is the third event in our philanthropic programs for this programmatic year. And I want to be sure everybody is aware of another opportunity to connect, and I hope you'll join in. On Sunday, May 2nd at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we will welcome back Michael Solomonoff to Road of Shalom, this time to hear his story of addiction and recovery. After his story, there's going to be a panel discussion moderated by our congregant, Colleen Barry, who's the chair of the Department of Health Policy and Management at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, featuring Richard Roisman, Karen Board of Trustees member at Karen Treatment Centers, and Dr. Tom Scott, a pain management specialist. Please sign up on our website if you haven't RSVP'd yet. And I would also like to mention this week on Thursday at 7 o'clock, we will welcome Mara B. Gadd to speak on her memoir, The Color of Love, the story of a mixed race Jewish girl. Please see our website for how to attend. Thank you to each one of you for being here, and have a great evening.